Good evening. Welcome to the first Dinner with Eagles. Tonight, we're going to honor the airmen of the Mighty Eight. This event is hosted by the Commemorative Air Force Dixie Wing based in Peachtree City. The Commemorative Air Force was founded in 1957. We are the largest World War II flying museum in the world. We have 12,000 members across the United States and in many countries overseas. We have proudly restored 164 aircraft, and the mission of the CAF is very simple. We believe our cause is first and foremost about education. Our goal is to ensure that generations of Americans will value and support the contributions of military aviation in ensuring our nation's freedom. This weekend is very much a labor of love for over 100 volunteers, but it was made possible by the treasure of very few businesses here in the community. I'd like to recognize first of all Pat Epps. It was through his leadership and support that this weekend was made possible. We'd also like to recognize Steve Brown. He's the CEO and President of the Commemorative Air Force. Both these gentlemen provide us with valuable guidance and leadership. Other organizations that made this weekend possible, and especially tonight, are the Chamber of Commerce, Epps Aviation, Honda Carland, Dekalb-Peachtree Airport, Atlantic Aviation, the Aviation Institute of Maintenance, the Centennial Aviation Academy, and Warbird News. An event like this cannot happen unless many people share a common vision. Finally, I would like to recognize Jay Bess and Moreno Aguirre. Both these men conceived of this event, and 4 months later, it has come to pass. So when you see these gentlemen, thank them very much. We will be recording this event tonight. You're welcome to take photos. You're welcome to video the event. But please stay out of the line of sight of the video camera located to the back of the room. Finally, I would like to introduce Bruce Gamble. Bruce is the panel moderator at tonight's event. Bruce is a Naval Flight Officer. He's published 6 books about the Pacific War, and he's going to share with you a very personal connection he has to B-17 Flying Fortress. In 2013, Bruce was awarded a Florida Book Award for his good work around the Pacific War. Ladies and gentlemen, Bruce Gamble.
Thank you very much, Chris. It's a real honor to be here tonight. I think you're going to be highly entertained, but also, more importantly, educated by these 5 gentlemen who I will introduce in just a few minutes. I'm going to start out with a little program before I introduce them, so just bear with me for a minute. And I do especially want to thank all of the men and women of the Dixie Wing and Arizona Wings of the Commemorative Air Force for putting this together. And also, we need to thank the staff of the 57th Fighter Group Restaurant, who are really bending over backwards to accommodate us in this room. And they're doing a great job, and I think the food was pretty good too. So, thank you to the restaurant. Thank you. This year we are featuring, and again, this is an inaugural event, so it's kind of a learning experience as we go along. And Jay and Mo really did conceive this literally just a matter of months ago. So it's quite incredible that it has come this far in just a few months' time to put it all together. We're featuring this year the B-17. Of course, it's not the only plane we have out there, but for this year, it's kind of the highlight, and we were so glad that the Arizona Wing was able to bring the B-17G Sentimental Journey here, and I saw it fly today, and it's just for people who got to buy a ride. What a fantastic opportunity. I'm going to start out with a couple of remarks going back in time so that we can kind of roll the clock back a little bit. I'm a member of the baby boom generation. My parents were part of the greatest generation, as we like to call them. My dad was a bomber pilot in World War II in the Pacific, and my uncle was a bombardier in the Pacific. A little bit more about them. But just some things to think about, just in contrast to what we have right now today. In 1940, the last census before we entered World War II, the population of the United States was approximately 123 million people. At the end of the program, I'll bring that back into perspective with some numbers of what we're looking at today. In 1940, the average life expectancy for men in the United States was just over the age of 60. And for women, it was approximately 65. We've come a long way since then. The country was just beginning to emerge from 10 years of incredible financial depression and economic depression. 12 to 15 million people were unemployed during that period of time, and almost half of the banks in the United States had closed their doors. In 1940, most households did enjoy some kind of electronic entertainment in the form of radio. That was about 90% of American households had at least one radio in 1940. So there was electronic entertainment. A lot of times we like to hear about, oh, we didn't have all the equipment and the technology of now, but the radio ruled the airwaves, and big bands ruled the dance floor. You know, Benny Goodman and Tommy Dorsey and James, all the big bands that I grew up listening to on my parents' records. The first color movies to come out of Hollywood had come out just 1 year before the 1940 census, with The Wizard of Oz and then Gone with the Wind. And in 1940, IBM computers were electromechanical. They were computation machines, and they took up, in some cases, the floor of an entire city block. They would take up that much space. Today, if somebody wants to hold up a smartphone, that smartphone has more computing power than all of the computers used in sending the Saturn rockets up to the moon in 1969. So a little bit of putting things in perspective. Unfortunately, tonight, with the seating arrangement, some of you are just not going to be able to see the pictures. I've got some slides up here on a PowerPoint on the screen over the mantle. Some of you are just going to have a tough time seeing that. And a lot of times people say, well, a picture's worth 1,000 words. Tonight, I think hearing these gentlemen speak will be worth 1,000 pictures, because we're going to have an opportunity in just a couple minutes to hear from 5 members of the mighty 8th Air Force. So I'm going to start this out just to legitimize who I am a little bit and why I'm here. That's me on the far right when I was a lieutenant in the Navy aboard the carrier Carl Vinson, flying in the A-3 Sky Warrior. I spent several years over in the Pacific, and that's where I learned about the Pacific and the islands and the topography and the geography there. But tonight we're celebrating the B-17, among other things, and my uncle was a bombardier in the first B-17 squadron to go to New Guinea from Hawaii. My dad was a pilot in this aircraft, the B-29, based on Guam, which happened to be the same island where I was stationed 40 years later. So we're going to segue now to the start of the war, the attack on Pearl Harbor, which actually found a squadron of B-17s arriving from California during the height of the attack. And if you've seen the movie Tora, 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 you know about that episode where the B-17s are coming in and they're crash landing. This is an early D model B-17. You can tell by the strange kind of elliptical fin and the skinny fuselage. It crash landed at Bellows Field. This is one that was shot up in the air and made a crash landing at Hickam, and the flares were ignited aboard the plane and it burned in 2 pieces. The only fatality, surprisingly, out of all the squadrons was a flight surgeon who was riding in that particular airplane and suffered a fatal head wound from a Japanese machine gun bullet. A couple of months later, the first B-17 squadron left Hawaii and went over to Australia. It became known as the Kangaroo Squadron because they were based in Australia. And they flew the first American raid on the Japanese stronghold of Rabaul in late February. So this was not the first combat for the B-17. Some of the squadrons that were in the Far East Air Force were involved in the Philippines when the Japanese attacked there in December of 1941. But the first big raid on Rabaul came, and only 5 planes. We're going to hear about raids tonight with 1,000 bombers. In 1942, the squadron was lucky to get 5 B-17s over the target. And that was hard work for them to get 5. On that first raid, 1 aircraft didn't make it back. It made a crash landing in a swamp on New Guinea. And that B-17 became quite famous. It's an E model, became known as the Swamp Ghost because it would seemingly appear and disappear when the kunai grasses grew up and would hide it during the wet season. And then during the dry season, when the grasses would recede, the bomber would appear again and be rediscovered. In 2006, the plane was dismantled and lifted out of the swamp. There it is, going back in the air for the first time in over 60 years, being lifted up by a helicopter. And it was brought back to the United States, to Los Angeles, where I had the opportunity to see this plane that was in my uncle's squadron. The plane was since moved to Hawaii, and my sister took this photograph just Monday of this week, at the Pacific Aviation Museum in Hawaii on Ford Island in Pearl Harbor. And you can see, some of you may be able to see, a few of the bullet holes in the vertical stabilizer of that aircraft. So the B-17 did play a pretty important role in the Pacific War. I don't know if all of you can read that, but it served, E and F models served all the way through 1943 with the 5th Air Force and the 13th Air Force. And they began then gradually to replace the B-17 with the B-24 in the Pacific because it could fly faster and carry a bigger payload. And the B-17 G models and late F models were all going to Europe to fight against Nazi Germany. After the B-17s left the Pacific theater, the heavy bombing campaign, at least in the Central Pacific then, was taken over by the B-29s, of which my dad was a member of the 20th Air Force. So that brings us up real quickly to tonight's program, and I appreciate you bearing with me on my little history lesson on the Pacific War. And tonight we're going to hear from 5 members of the Mighty Eight, and I'm going to introduce them chronologically by age. Our first member was Bob Punchy Powell, who is sitting to my right, who was born on September 1st, 1920 in Heflin, Alabama. Excuse me, I missed one. Oldest guy here is Albert. Pardon me, I missed one. I jumped ahead on my paper here. Albert McMahon, born on September 1st, 1920 in Heflin, Alabama. He studied at Auburn for 2 years before the attack on Pearl Harbor interrupted his college plans. Out of the group of 5 here on the panel tonight, Albert arrived overseas the first and earliest and was involved in some of the earliest B-17 missions that the 8th Air Force flew. Initially, he was trained as a mechanic, not as a crew member or an air member, but later volunteered to fly as a tail gunner after his unit suffered numerous casualties. Albert served in the 306 Bomb Group based at Turley, England, which flew its first mission against a locomotive works in Lille, France on October 8th of 1942. So the B-17s were, in Albert's group that is, were involved in combat, not that much after the B-17s in the Pacific. Next along chronologically, on my right, is Bob Punchy Powell. You want to acknowledge that? He was born November 21st, 1920 in Wilco, West Virginia. Spent a few semesters at West Virginia University before joining the Army to train as a fighter pilot. And he's our lone representative of the fighter community here tonight. He flew with the 352nd Fighter Group, which was based at Bodney, England, and adopted the nickname of the Blue-Nosed Bastards of Bodney. They were initially equipped with the huge Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, which had 8 50 caliber machine guns and a great big 2,000 horsepower Pratt & Whitney radial engine. And it quickly became known as the Jug. because of its size. Later, the group transitioned into the sleek and small P-51 Mustang that we saw out here today. There's a fighter on a stick outside the front door that has Punchy's aircraft markings and group markings on it. And in the P-51, Punchy scored 2 aerial victories, and he also had some ground destruction, and we'll hear about that later on tonight. Next in chronological order is Parrish Hap Chandler, who's down at the far end on my right, who was born July 28, 1921, and raised nearby here in Toccoa, Georgia. He trained as a navigator and was assigned to the 491st Bomb Group, the Ringmasters. His group arrived overseas in April of 1944 and was based at Metfield, England in B-24s. So Hap is our lone B-24 Liberator representative. On my immediate left is Jonathan Swift, born March 14, 1924, raised in Raleigh, North Carolina. He attended NC State for a semester and then went into the Air Service in 1942. He trained as a bombardier and joined the 303rd Bomb Group, the Hells Angels, and distinguished himself as an outstanding bombardier in the B-17. Down in between Albert and Jonathan is Henry Huey. He's our youngest. He was born October 30th, 1925, and raised in Memphis, Tennessee. He was attending Central High School and did not even graduate before joining up to fight in World War II. Later, then, he received his diploma from high school in 1947. Henry became a ball turret gunner in the 487th Bomb Group, the Gentleman from Hell. By the time he got overseas, the mission requirement had been raised. When Albert was over there, you had to complete 25 missions and get through 25 to be able to come home. And when Henry got over there, they had raised the requirement to 35, which probably didn't make you feel all that positive about your future. We're going to start out then with, I'm going to just send questions their way. And just go around the circle here, you might say, asking each of these gentlemen some particular questions about their expertise, about their experiences. Punchy and Jonathan are parked really close to me because they are hard of hearing. And so bear with us. I might be shouting in their ear to ask a question. It's probably going to come over the microphone, but just bear with us so that we can get the communication going. But we're going to start out again with the chronology here in Albert. We're going to start with you. There have been a lot of things said about the life expectancy of a tail gunner once combat began. I've heard just a matter of minutes once combat was initiated. And you volunteered to be a tail gunner because your group had lost so many. What motivated you to do something that was costing so many lives? What was your motivation?
Well, can you hear me? Okay. I didn't know if the mic was on or not. Well, the thing that motivated me was I was curious, could I do what the people who were flying were doing? And I said, there's only one way to find out, and that's to get on the combat crew. And so what had happened is that the crew that I got on had lost 2 tail gunners, and when I say lost, had been injured, and they never flew again. And those 2 were sent back to the States and never flew again in combat or anything like that. And I was the 3rd tail gunner on the crew. And I may be getting ahead of myself, but on my first mission, they shot hell out of the tail, plus the rest of the airplane. And I was very lucky to get back, but I didn't get a scratch on me, not one little scratch. But I did get, not on that mission, but on a later mission, we had electrically heated suits, and later on in the war. And I had on an electrically heated suit, and it had an umbilical cord on it that was heated, was attached to a 24-volt system on the plane, and my electrically heated suit shorted out, and I got a big black blister on my belly. And
I'm going to forward through a couple of pictures here. There's the tail gun position on a B-17, and I'm probably going to get out of sequence on some of these when these guys are talking, but this was his viewpoint. And that's the position that the tail gunner was in that cramped space. So how did you feel after flying, all those many hours? There must have been a few sore spots.
well, that's not exactly correct, because you were sitting on a bicycle type seat,
Okay.
and you were on your knees like that, and it just got doggone tiring. But you just sweated it out, took it, because that was part of the job. Was you had to be in that uncomfortable position, and I just sweated it out. And though I was darn tired, that when I got back every time, what happened was that you get used to it, and it's just a normal, ordinary kind of thing to happen.
Thank you. We're going to come back to Albert again with more questions. And now I want to turn the mic over to Punchy Powell. Let me know if you can't hear me, because I'll be asking you a question. Your group started out in the Thunderbolt, which did not have the range to escort the bombers very far. In fact, you guys didn't go much beyond the English Channel. Do you recall what some of the radio chatter was when you had to turn back? Was there chatter between you and the bombers about, waving goodbye and that sort of thing? And what was some of your emotion about only escorting them part way and then knowing they had to go the rest of the way by themselves?
Well, the Germans weren't very dumb. They knew that we could only fly a little bit past the Ruhr Valley and get back home for lack of fuel. So they waited, in many cases, they waited until we had to turn around, and then they hit the bombers. So that's when we switched over to Mustang. But as far as the flying the Thunderbolt was concerned, the range was our biggest problem. It was a wonderful airplane otherwise, and but we couldn't go all the way with the bombers, and when it was a very pitiful thing to see the bombers go on and get hit after we were gone, and we were really happy when we got the Mustangs.
We're going to keep moving along, and we'll come back to Hap in just a minute. In fact, we'll to Punchy, we go ahead and hand it over to Hap. And Hap, can you hear me okay?
Hey, fun.
Okay, there you go. I'll tone it down a little bit. You have a fondness for pointing out the good side, the attributes of the Liberator, because you're the one B-24 guy here, and we've been kind of hyping the B-17 today. What are some of the things you really liked about the B-24, and what made it, in your opinion, what made it better than the B-17?
Well, first I would like to allay a couple of rumors. One is that the B-17 was not a 4-engine Piper Cub. And the second one is the B-24 is not the bucks that the B-17 came in. The B-24 was a remarkable airplane built in the largest number of any 4-engine bomber in World War II, thanks to Henry Ford and Willow Run assembly plant. It could fly further than the B-17 because it had increased fuel capacity. It had Pratt & Whitney engines, which was a real plus compared to the Curtiss engine on the B-17. It would carry a heavier bomb load, and if you take a look at the B-17, which on the ground is not a particularly photogenic airplane, you'll notice that it has two large bomb bays. The B-17 has a rather small bomb bay. I hasten to add for my B-17 friend, I don't intend to put down the fact that they were the principal group. There were probably 30 groups of B-17 over Germany to our 14 B-24 group. Nevertheless, the B-24 dropped 48% of the total tonnage on Germany. I had the I guess it was a privilege. The honor to serve my country in a B-24. And it brought me home 35 times. Full of holes, engine shot out, rudders which had problems. And I could go on, but the people I want to pay particular attention to and honor them for the ground crew. As soon as we hit that hard stand, the crew chief and his men were right on an airplane. We thought it'd never fly again. They would change an engine overnight, patch it up with Prince Albert cans, and we were ready to go the next morning. It was a marvelous airplane. It never really got the credit for what it did. It served in, if I recall correctly, 7 different air forces. The British, Canadian, Australian, Indian, and on and on. As far as I know, there are only 2 still flying. One is Bob Collins, All-American, and the other is out at the Commemorative Air Force Headquarters. I forgot the name. It's got a very gorgeous lady painted on the side, Diamond Lil. Somebody told me they're converting it to a bomber. It was actually an LB-30, of which there were 30 built. Those were built to carry fuel over the hump. It was versatile. It was powerful. It did a heck of a job, and it brought us home. Other than that, I can't pay more credit.
Thank you, Hap. We're going to keep moving on here to, and we'll be coming back to you again, sir. Henry, your turn. Ball turret gunner. Let me move up a couple of slides here for you. There you go. There's a picture of Henry when he was a little bit younger. As a ball turret gunner, you know, the requirements were to be relatively small, to curl up into this little sphere. There you go. And you also had to really be fearless, I think. This is just personal opinion, to hang underneath the airplane like that to fight the enemy. And then, as you mentioned to me the other day, I don't know if you can see this from the slide, but the gunner's head is right in between the 2 receivers of a pair of 50 caliber machine guns. They are literally banging away right on either side of his head. So I'd like to have you tell us tonight what it was like to sit in that fetal position, hanging underneath the airplane, to fight the Germans.
It's the only place you can lay on your back and fight a war. The poor old ball turret. Now remember, ladies and gentlemen, I flew that thing 70 years ago. Now I am a ball turret. But there's been a lot of sad stories about the dangerous position it is. If I thought that pilot sitting up there in the left-hand seat was in a safer spot than me, he'd have been flying from the ball and I'd have been in the back seat. The poor guy over here, tail gonna sit on a bicycle seat for 8 hours. There was not enough room to even turn or twist. And when he got back home, I don't know how he could even walk.
It was difficult.
One thing I want to start with tonight, ladies and gentlemen, the 8th Air Force was the greatest team effort ever before attempted by man. Now we got Punchy over here was a fighter pilot. Bombardiers, navigators, gunners. We did the dying, we did the flying. But the poor guys that didn't make it home because of that 25 missions when he flew, Albert said he never saw an Allied fighter in any of his missions. I had escort. Well, he had escort, but it was all German. But the base air depot people, the armament people, medical, truck drivers, KP pushers, They fed us, and without them folks, we'd have lost the war. Aircraft do not repair themselves. They don't put new engines on, and I've come back with 2 engines shot out, tail gone away, 6 feet off the wing, and you get up in the morning, there's 2 brand new engines on there, ready to be slow time. You slept, and those ground personnel worked all night. I take my hat off to them every day. And I take my hat off to Punchy. Albert didn't have escort. When we got over there, my time with the 8th Air Force, I was a young man, 18 years old when we left for England. I spent 6 months in the 8th Air Force. Flew 32 missions, got shot down once. Came back and flew 5 more. But the missions get to be like going to work from 8 to 5. And when that old CQ comes in the morning and says, "Hey, Sweeney, what's the fuel load?" 2,200 gallons. Oh, a quickie. If he said 27.8, he topped off after pre-flight. Oh, God, we're going to be there all day long. But it took everybody doing their thing to make that mission possible. When you get that many aircraft in the air, and my group led the largest mission ever put up by anybody's Air Force, Christmas Eve of '44, over 2,000 bombers and 936 fighters in the air at the same time, the same day. Man. And the first mission active, high altitude, August 17, 1942, a massive flight, 12 aircraft. And the guy in the lead ship was a young major named Paul Gibbons, who went on to fly the Enola Gay. I don't regret a minute of it. I lost a lot of good friends. My time was short with the 8th Air Force. I went into the aviation cadet program, but I got in late. And they announced one morning at roll call that cadet program's ended. We got 5 pilots for every seat. But the good news is you're going to be a gunner. And that's the saying those days was a gunner today and a gunner tomorrow. But we did a job. And missions got to be just like I said, going to work 8 to 5. I used to go down and stand, look under the curtain and see where we were going and go stand in the back of the room. Because it didn't make any difference where we were going. You learned one thing, that the Air Force was not a debating society. If they said Berlin, you go to Berlin. They said Merseburg, you go to Merseburg. We lost 56 bombers and 30 fighters in one day at Merseburg. And that was all anti-aircraft. Hey, make somebody else go.
That's all right. Hey, thank you very much. And we're going to come back to Henry. So, hang on to that microphone there, Jonathan. And in case you can't hear me, you can read this along with me. I want to have you describe, you became a bombardier, and that's an art. There's a real art to learning how to hit a target from 5 miles up. So kind of tell us a little bit about what's involved in learning how to aim bombs, and maybe you can talk a little bit about the famous Norden bomb sight.
Can you hear me? Yes, sir. The Norden bomb sight wasn't the most accurate bomb sight. The Sperry was more accurate. The English used it. We used the Norden because if any part of it got damaged by anti-aircraft, you could compensate. There were ways you could work the bomb sight. Also, it worked with the automatic pilot better than the Sperry. Very few people know it. On the bomb run, the bombardier flew the plane. You turned on an IP point, an identification point, and then went toward the target. And the movies and all, it's a 30-second run. In real life, it's a 10-minute to 20-minute run. And you have to calculate, of course, you put in the bomb sight the altitude you're flying at. And on the bomb run, the pilot checks the airspeed and the altitude, and the bomb sight really flies the plane on the whole bomb run. Now we kind of cheated. It's not in the records anywhere, but you're supposed to turn on the IP point and concentrate on the target. Well, we had ways that we would get an imaginary target between the IP point and the target and get all the data in the bomb sight on that. Then we'd zigzag the plane with the bomb sight. The bomb sight flew the plane. We would zigzag it so the anti-aircraft wouldn't get us. And nothing was ever written about that. It wasn't in the records anywhere that you did that, but most of the lead bombardiers did zigzag so the anti-aircraft couldn't home in on you. Hitting the target wasn't as hard as finding the thing. There'd be clouds and camouflage and smoke screens, and you had to figure ways to bomb through the. It's too complicated to explain how you bomb through a smoke screen. You really pick up IP points way off to the side, put your crosshairs on that, and you figure out on the map where the target was, so you didn't actually see the target a lot of times when you dropped the bombs on it. You knew where it was, but you didn't actually see it, but you could see some points on the outside. Now, if there's complete coverage of the target, you either bombed a radar or went to another target. That was kind of up to the lead bombardier. And the bombardier had control of the plane on the run, and also, if you didn't like what you were seeing on the run, it wasn't the pilot's prerogative, it was yours to decide to go around and come into another target or come into this one again. I'm not trying to belittle the pilot so much, but in the movies, he's always saying, "Great shot, Joe, you hit the target." Well, he probably could see 30 miles from the target. The pilot couldn't see the target up there. The only person that could see it was the bombardier and the tail gunner. and the ball turned. Well, the ball turned usually, if I'm not mistaken, you turned over on the bomb run. So he had metal between him and the fighters that all the anti-aircraft. So the tail gunner is really looking behind, so really the only person that could see the target and know whether you hit it or not was the bombardier. And of course you took pictures of it, and then the pilot could look at that later on, but that was the next day or something. And I'll talk about that later, but being cold was the hardest. Being shot at was the worst part of the mission. Being cold was the second worst, but you stayed cold the whole time and you weren't shot at but part of the time.
We're going to come back around and you can explain a little bit about that, what the temperature was like.
I'd like to tell an incident about the cold.
Okay, go ahead. You want to do it now?
Can you do it now?
Go ahead. You got the mic.
It would be 60, the coldest hour I flew in was 55 below zero. That's cold. You can't touch anything with your skin. To use the bomb sight, you use silk gloves because you couldn't use a regular glove. Everybody else just had regular gloves now. Later on, we had electric suits, but you had to dress in case that electric suit didn't work. It might short out or you might get part of the power shots. So I counted the layers. I wore 5 layers of clothes. And I remember one day we went to Bowling, Georgia. That's in Bowling, Georgia, in the Leipzig flight area. They issued the tail gunner, the Navigator, and the bombardier a flak seat. You actually a piece of like a flak suit. You sat on it, and it kept the flak from hitting you in the rear. And each plane had 3 of those in there. Well, somebody always stole them, and you never could get them. Somebody. So this day I was sitting on the lid of a pot-belly stove. Take that out. You sit on that, and a mission, you know, it was 6, 8, 10 hours long, and this was a deep. Only missions I flew was kind of complicated with deep penetration. This was a deep penetration. So I'm sitting on this piece of metal that's 55 below zero, and I began hurting in my rear side. We came back to had interrogation there, and you don't warm up. It takes you about an hour when you get to a mission to get warm again. Your feet are cold, you're cold. Well, I began warming up in interrogation, and told him I need to go see the medic. And he said, why? I said, well, I think I froze my ass. Went in to see the medic, and he said, you look pretty healthy. What are you doing here? So I told him the same thing. He said, well, let's see. Let's bend over here. Let's check you. He said, oh, you know, I'm a doctor now. I try to say, oh, so he said, what do you see, doc? He said, well, you know, people have a plexus of veins, anal plexus and humeral plexus, and if it gets stagnant or real cold, the blood in that clots, and you get. I said, Doctor, tell me in plain terms what's wrong with me. He said, well, Lieutenant, you froze your ass.
That's too funny.
I could have told you that 3 hours ago. He didn't think this was very funny. He said to the corpsman, there's a clamp, and I couldn't see it. He was down in the scaffold. And I must have landed 45 minutes ago. I could not feel, I still was numb. That's how damn cold. I didn't feel him cut. He took that clamp, and all of a sudden, a thing, a clot of blood about the size of a peanut bounced off of the wall. And he said, oh, that took care of you. And I said, Doc, I feel something warm running down my leg. That couldn't be blood, could it? He said, yes. I said, well, do I get the Purple Heart? He said, no, you get a Kotex.
I think we're going to just stop right here. Y'all, this is perfect. Nobody's going to top that.
I ain't had much experience in wearing one of these. What do I do with it? It doesn't look like it's going to last long. He said, here, take a half a box of, you have those. I said, what do I do if we give out of those? He said, come back and get another box. I said, you need to see me again? He said, no. So I took a little piece of cotton and put it in the lapel. I figured if I didn't get the Purple Heart, I'd get the white.
Oh, no. Thank you very much. No, I was not expecting that one. We're going to go back over to Albert, and we're going to turn it a little serious again now, because Albert's group, the you see, find my notes here, 306, they, led by the group commander, Colonel Frank Armstrong, they actually made the first raid on German soil in 1943, January of 43. Then the raids started to get longer and penetrate further into Germany, still without fighter escort. And there were a couple of very infamous raids on the Schweinfurt ball bearing works that resulted in extremely high losses. 60 planes on one raid, with 10 men in each bomber. That's 600 Americans that didn't come back. Not all of them had been killed, but a lot of them were prisoners of war. But Albert, on the, let me see, it was in October, your group, the 306 on an October 14th raid lost 10 out of the 15 bombers that took part in that Schweinfurt raid, which meant 100 empty cots in your barracks that night and in your group. Can you recall that particular event? Were you on the raid or
No,
okay?
I was not on that mission. In April of 43, I think it was, and I hope I've got the right date. My crew went to Africa to deliver a special secret load, which turned out to be the plans to photograph and attack some island, and right now I'm missing it. They just have to forgive me for that. So no, I was not on that mission. Thank God, because they did lose 10 planes in just a short time to German fighters. Okay, can I go on for a moment here?
Please.
No, what happened to me is that at the beginning, we had, the first mission I was on, we had 112 bombers on it. 80 B-17s, and there were, how many of the others were 24. And the B-24 was something we always liked to see go on a mission with us, because they could fly, couldn't defend themselves as well as the B-17 could. And when the B-24s were up there, the German fighters would concentrate on the B-24s. And then we said they're the best escort we ever had.
The gloves are coming off.
Let me change the slant of this a little bit. When you go on a mission, what happens is that before you go into a briefing room, and they have a big map up on the wall that is covered where you can't see it. And Henry said he went and snuck up and looked underneath to see where they were going. But unfortunately, that wasn't the case, that you could do that in many of the bomb groups, I don't think, because that was top secret until, everybody could see where you're going. They pulled back the screen up there, the curtains, and you could see. And you could, when certain missions happened to some of the very difficult targets, you could hear a deep huh, or damn, and it wasn't happy at all. But as I said, I flew 25 missions. I was the third tail gunner on the crew, as I told you before, and I was really scared. Henry says he wasn't scared, but I was, because I saw these two guys after they came back, and both of them were shot up. Both of them had frozen hands or feet or whatever, because in the early days of the war, now this is really early, we didn't have electrically heated suits. What we did was we put on wool underwear, 2 sets of wool underwear, that's tops, bottoms, the whole bit, and you put on a wool jacket, and on top of that you put on a sheepskin with a fleece-lined jacket on top of it, and that's the kind of pants you had as well. And then when it came to the feet, your boots were not electrically heated or anything like that. They were just damn cold because what you had on was nothing but sheepskin and your socks, and you put on everything that you put on, and your feet would still be cold. There was no way to keep warm. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Coming back around to Punchy, we all think of the fighters and their escort duties and air-to-air combat, but you also flew quite a few missions with either strafing or dive bombing missions. And could you talk a little bit about those other roles of the fighters that we sometimes don't remember that you did a lot of that kind of work as well?
Yes, we had a procedure, as I said, after Al was there, when we got some escort with the Thunderbolt, which wouldn't go much past the rear. And but anyway, we had some procedures on the long-range missions with the Mustangs. We would, since we were 100 miles an hour faster than the bombers, we had to zigzag with them as we escorted them. And when we would go in, escort them to a certain point from, say, A to B, and another fighter group would come directly in to point B, pick them up and escort them to the target, near the target. Another fighter group would pick them up, and after they came out of the target, and bring them home. And that's the way the overlapping coverage to protect the bombers. I had great respect for these guys, air crews in the B-17s and the B-24s. I saw too many of them go down, mostly to flak. When we were with them, we were able to cut their losses down considerably. Speaking of dive bombing, using a Norden bomb or the Sperry, whatever, my first dive bombing mission, we dive bombed a German airfield. I had never had one single practice mission dive bombing. In our training, they never taught us to dive bomb at all. So my first combat mission, which we dive bombed, was my first practice mission. It wasn't very accurate, but we had a lot of we did a lot of strafing and dive bombing, and the reason we did that was that we could destroy a lot of the German aircraft on the ground, and when we would strafe a German airfield, which was the most dangerous thing we did, because we would come in at low level, treetop level, and we would dive into the field and try to stay under 50 feet, which is about the height of a telephone pole. Well, we figured that if the German guns all around the field, if they lowered their guns enough, they'd be shooting at each other. So we figured we had an arc of safety of about 50 feet. We would come in and strafe the air, but you had to pull up off of that field, and you had hundreds of guns shooting at you. I got battle damage 5 times. 4 of them were strafing German airfield. So it was the most dangerous thing. We lost more pilots that way than in the air. But you had to pull up off of that field at the end of it, and that's when you normally got hit. As you pulled up off of that field, that's when my wingman took a bullet in his radiator in the Mustang, which was a liquid-cooled airplane, and he had to bail out about 15 miles from the airfield we had just strafed, which is not very good. And he was a prisoner of war for a year. At the same time he got hit, I got part of my horizontal stabilizer blown away, and I was trying to fight the airplane and get it high enough that I could bail out. But as I slowed down in the climb, and I was fighting it to keep it from stalling out in the climb, the airplane slowed down. I got so I could handle it a little bit, and I leveled it off, sat back down in the seat, did not bail out, brought it home and landed it. And when I got back to the field, the colonel called me and said, "Punchy, are you going to land that thing or are you going to bail out?" I said, "I'd like to land it." He said, "Well, wait till I get all the airplanes on the field. I don't want a crash plane on the field when you're coming in." When they were coming in. So But anyway, dive bombing was pretty much hit and miss. We did get a little better with it later after some practice doing it. But that was the other thing. May I tell about our most famous battle?
Please.
Okay. I'm very proud that I was with the 352nd Fighter Group. We destroyed 776 German aircraft. We lost 93 pilots. We had 29 aces, and we flew 420 missions. I flew 83 of those. But anyway, on January 1st, well, let me say this. The Battle of the Bulge had just finished. And our fighters were all located on the airfield, on airfields in Belgium and France. And we were just 15 miles back of the front lines. And we were harassing, our groups were harassing the retreat of the Germans from the Battle of the Bulge. Well, Hitler told General Galland, whom I met later after the war, told General Galland he wanted to have a surprise mission on January 1st, 1945, New Year's Day, to destroy as many American and British aircraft as they could on the ground. 800 German aircraft attacked the 16 fighter bases on the continent at that time. My group, Colonel J.C. Meyer, who was one of the top aces of the war, had persuaded General Quesada to let him put up a patrol of 12 aircraft. They were waiting to take off just as about 80 German aircraft, fighters and fighter bombers, struck our airfield, strafing and dive bombing it. Colonel Meyer said, "Let's get them in the air, boys." Through some miracle, under fire, they took off. Colonel Meyer shot his first German plane down as his wheels were coming up. The plane went across in front of him, strafing a plane on the ground, and he turned just enough and gave one shot, one squirt, and knocked him down. Those 12 pilots, I was not one of them, those 12 pilots got in the air through some miracle, and in an air battle right over our field, shot down 24 German aircraft and lost none. To me, that was the most dramatic air battle that I heard about. Our enlisted men, our ground officers, our support on the ground, and I had a lot of respect for those guys. They did a great job. Our enlisted men had never seen their pilots in action. That was the first time. They were lying in a slit trench, which had been cut just for that purpose. And they watched this air battle lying on their backs in the slit trench, and watched their airplanes and their pilots shoot down 24 airplanes and lose none. German planes were falling on our field and were falling all near the field and chasing each other across the field and so forth. It was a very, very dramatic air battle. And I'm just proud that I had the opportunity to fly with one of the most highly decorated Air Force fighter groups in World War II. We were the only fighter group in the Mighty 8th that received the Presidential Unit Citation 2 times. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Great to see you.
Thank you, President. Coming back around to Hap now. The thing I share in common with you, Hap, is being a navigator. I spent my Navy career as a navigator overseas and in the islands. And I remembered something that I wanted to ask you about when we were learning all the rules for the way that you calculate navigation. I remember that you start out with your true heading, and then you figure in what's called variation to get magnetic heading, and then you factor in a thing called deviation to get your compass reading. And if you're in a westerly area or direction, you add the deviation, and if you're in an easterly direction, you subtract. So to remember this rule, there was this little ditty that for the T being the true, V being variation, M being magnetic, D being deviation, and C being compass was timid virgins make dull company at weddings. And so that was on the at weddings was Ad West. And I don't remember what the little ditty was for, I guess you just remember if it was timid virgins make dull company at weddings, you remember that, okay, you add for westerly, and then just by automatic rule, you subtract going easterly. Did they happen to teach that one to you guys in the Army Air Forces during World War II or something similar to that? Do you remember any little help or remembering those rules? That's the first question. I got him. I totally befuddled him with that one.
There was some kiddings, but they didn't pertain to deviation variation. It's my feeling. I went to pre-flight school and I was supposed to stay there 3 months. And I've been there probably 7 weeks, and we went to the base theater, and some idiot stood up, I think he was a major, and said, "Opportunity of a lifetime. Who wants to go to navigation school tomorrow?" And I was the first man up. I think I was a bombardier trainee, but at any rate, I spent Christmas time, 1944, going from Houston, Texas to Coral Gables, Florida, and we were supposed to be in a 6-month program run by Pan American Airways to become a navigator. It turned into a 3.5-month program. The point of that is we were pretty poorly trained. And I think that was generally true of the whole 8th Air Force, because when I got to the squadron, you learned that it took about 10 missions before you really knew what you were doing. And a punchy story about learning dive bombing on the job without any prior instruction or help. That's just the way it was. I was in the 491st Bomb Group. It was the last B-24 group operational prior to D-Day, through its first mission on 4 June. By the end of the war, they had completed 177 missions. And General Leon Johnson, who was the commander of the 14th Combat Wing, made this comment. He said, "No other group in the 8th Air Force has ever flown so many missions in a short period of time with such outstanding results." You know, we thought that might be public relations hype. But in 1990, there was a magazine published by VMI, and the editor was General Ramsey Potts, one of the true heroes of the air war over Germany. And he said, of all the groups in the European theater, and that included the 15th Air Force, no other group equaled the record for the 491st. So I was very happy to serve in that group. Our operations officer, who was then a Lieutenant Colonel Jack Merrill, became a 4-star general. We had a smiling major, 22 years old, Jim Keck. He was the operations officer in the 853rd Squadron. He became a lieutenant general. He was the number 2 man at SAC and would have been the SAC commander, except for some dirty politics on the part of a 4-star general who commanded the military transport command. Without going into all that, we talked about moving 60 airplanes, 59 airplanes, over target. The numbers are something like this. There were 28,000 men who came back from prisoner war camp, and there were 26,000 who died in the air war with Germany. If you take a look at the total casualties of World War II, you'll see that 26,000 were 11% of the total. That's a very high number because it exceeds the Marine Corps, Navy, and almost exceeds the total of the Marine Corps and the Navy. Now, I don't mean to put the Navy or the Marine Corps don't mean to put them down, but the Marines hit the beach and they lost a lot of men in a hurry, but they left the beach they left the islands to the Army to mop up. The 8th Air Force had nobody to come in and take over that job. So we had to stay there. Ill-trained though we were, we learned on the job. In my opinion, we wrecked Germany from border to border. I think we never would have gone across the beaches of Normandy if the 8th Air Force not attained air superiority from the big week, which was in February of 1944. If you take a look at it, some of the greatest losses the 8th Air Force ever took, February, March, and April. That was prior to the landings at Normandy. It was one of the great air forces of all time. It was an honor and a privilege to serve in it, to be an aerial navigator. And I must say, the navigator was the hardest working man on the crew. We had to go to work. And the moment we went to briefing, and we had maps where we had red dots where all the flak was, and we had to keep the airplanes out of there. It was a tough job. It was very demanding, and I hope that I did a good job. In fact, I'm reasonably sure I did, because I was on a lead crew for 11 missions, and the pilot's name was Scammahorn. And Scammahorn led the 8th Air Force over the target in the Hanover area, and Doolittle himself said it was the greatest example of true airmanship that the 8th Air Force ever had. And you'll pardon me if I brag a little about the 491st, but they deserve it. And I take my hat off to General Jack Merrill, the operations officer, and General Fred Miller, who taught us how it was done. It was a great time, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, and I still mourn those guys. I had to come back to an empty hut a couple of times, and that's not a very interesting experience. Come back to a hut, and the beds were occupied by friends that we went to breakfast with and were now dead. Could we observe a moment of silence? I would ask you to stand, but that probably would turn every table. Could we observe a moment of silence in honor of those 26,000 plus who paid the price and who died over Germany? And most of them 19, 20 years old. They gave their tomorrows for our today. Thank you.
Jay, how are we doing time-wise? Can we keep going a little while? Oh, good. Okay.
Anybody want to stop?
No. I'm going to come back around to Henry, and it sort of segues into what Hap was just talking about. In your case, Henry, particular mission that stands out, I think, for you. None of us like to think about having to fight around Christmas time. You know, it's supposed to be the time of peace on earth and goodwill to all men. But you were part of a huge raid on Christmas Eve, 1944, hitting German airfields that resulted in a posthumous Medal of Honor for the strike leader, Brigadier General Frederick Castle. And I believe you were an eyewitness, and I was wondering if you would, I know it's a little bit grim, but share your recollection of that mission, a Christmas Eve mission.
I don't care how many missions you flew, there's going to be 4 or 5 that you never forget. And Christmas Eve was one of them. We went to briefing that morning, and the weather had been lousy. This was the first good day we'd had in several days. And the Germans almost pushed us back That was their last gasp of breath. And the briefing officer said, the target for today is the German airfield at Babenhausen. They're giving air support to their German ground forces. And General Castle is going to come over and lead the group today. And he has a reputation of never flying a milk run. But maybe we'll break the jinx today. It didn't happen. He paid with his life for that mission. I was right off the general's left wing when he went down. I was coming around, my ball turret never stopped turning, ever. I had the armament shacks at what we call creep, so that it constantly stayed in motion all the time. As I came around to the 3 o'clock position, I hit the push to talk button. I said, ball to pilot. I said, a 109 just went down through our squadron, and another one, and another one. And I looked around at 12 o'clock, and General Castle's number 3 engine's on fire. I can only assume, and I became a good friend of the bombardier on that aircraft that day, they put their landing gear down, and I said, what in the world is he doing? And I can only assume that his radio was shot out. He was signaling the David Lee to take over because he pulled his gear back up and pulled out of formation, and that's the last we saw of the general. 5 men bailed out, 4 survived. 1 was so badly wounded he died the next day. My group lost 114 men in 15 minutes. That was the worst mission of the war for us. And I said I wasn't scared, but I wasn't scared that day, but I knew that Santa Claus wouldn't have to look for Henry on Christmas Day because he'd be dead. I knew I would die that day. So I said, I'll take as many of you SOBs with me as I can. Now don't take offense. Where I come from, SOB does not carry the connotation you have in mind. It stands for some other Baptist. We did not have our escort with us because of weather, I'm told. They were delayed on takeoff. And the Germans were smart. They waited not for us to cross into their territory. They came and got behind us on our side. I saw them coming toward us, and I said, oh, here comes our escort. What are they doing with their landing lights on? They were not landing lights. There was cannon fire coming out of those wings of those ME-109s and FW-190s. I did shoot down an FW-190 that day. I broke a rule. They always preach to us, short burst, short burst. But I had this character framed with a computing site, textbook framing, and I unloaded on it. And the next thing I knew, I saw smoke come out of his cowling, then flame, and then he turned. He didn't fall down. He just started going like this, going away. And the interrogation officer said, did you follow him to the ground? I said, no, sir, I didn't. Well, why didn't you? I said, sir, there were 75 other German fighters up there, not on fire, not going down, and not only they deserve, they receive my undivided attention. And then Christmas Day, I remember what our target was supposed to be. We went to briefing, went down to the personal equipment shack, got my oxygen mask and Mae West and parachute, and put it all in an A3 bag and threw it on the truck. And it is snowing like mad. 50-cent piece size snowflakes. Red, the tannoy, it's a PA system all over the field. Red flare from the tower, mission scrub. I took my bags off, put the stuff back in the locker. My waist gunner, the engineer, and Father Pilboil, one of the priest there. And we went back over and had breakfast again. And those are the ones you remember. That on the 2nd day of March, 1945, the target was Dresden. We got across the channel, and our navigator called the pilot and says, we're off course. Now, any of you guys over there, you remember the flak charts. they had a map and they showed little circles. If you stay in those corridors, the theory was the Germans could shoot at you, but they couldn't hit you. But we caught about 8 bursts of flak. When we knew we had damage, but apparently nothing terminal. So we turned on the IP and started the bomb run. We lost number 4 engine. The co-pilot says, we got a fellow number 4, we're losing oil pressure. Right after the bomb's away, we lost another one. And now the old B-17 will fly on 2 engines, but I don't think the Germans would have let us cross Germany by ourselves. So they told us to turn and go to Poland. So we went, our navigator said, we're off of our maps, get the escape maps. He said, there's a railroad, follow it, all railroads lead somewhere. And we, in a snowstorm, you literally cannot see your wingtips. My turret burned out. I had to hand crank myself out of that turret and then crank it into the stowed position. We finally broke out and this looked like a strip. The pilot started for it, put the gear down, the flaps down, and the co-pilot says, it's too short, we'll never make it. He hit now we're down to 1 engine, and there's only one way you can go, and that's down. He hit the throttle on that one good engine, gave us just enough momentum to go over these traps into Cabbage Patch. The Russian sergeant came because we became the guests of the Russian Air Force. And fortunately, our bombardier's father was Russian, his mother was Polish, and Johnny spoke all 3. Never understood a word they said. But, so we went out the next day to get our bags out of the airplane, and the Russian said, "Nick, you have landed in a German minefield." And folks, we literally stood there and watched them blow up mines all the way around that airplane. If we had gone in with a true belly landing, I wouldn't be talking to you now, because we would have detonated them. Instead, we straddled them. And my pilot, who was the last, left me, he was the last man standing of our crew, about a year ago sent me a magazine from Poland where the Russians took that aircraft, 897, put new engines on it, and flew it the rest of the war. Then we finally, they knocked on the doors of the civilians and said, "You're going to put these 2 men up," and they knocked on this house. It wasn't an option. They issued the order. But they sent a C-47 in there, and in the meantime, 2 other aircraft had landed at the Warsaw Airport. They had sense enough to use the runway. And they took us to Poltava, an American base in Russia. And then they put us on an old C-46 and said, now, only the wounded will have oxygen. We're going to be at 18,000 feet, do not move around. Now, the rule was at 10,000 feet up, you own oxygen. But we sat there, we went into Iran, and we then took another flight, we went to Cairo, Payne Field. And I got so tickled, this old sergeant, we got ready to go. He said, now, we got to have your shot record. Sergeant, we don't have a shot record. I said, if I have anything more than my dog tags, I'm subject to court martial. Because all I can give the enemy is name, rank, and serial number. What he didn't know is that my driver's license, my shot record, all in my hip pocket. But they took us up to Libya and we went to Naples. And our crew chief, our flight engineer, was a little Italian boy from the Bronx, and he said, how many of you guys ever had any big old red wine? No, we're 19 years old, we don't drink. So he found a kiosk. We found out what red wine is. Man, sure be the way to go home, because I think I'm not going to find it. But then we went on to Paris and back to London. We got on train at Bowlington and went into downtown London, and just as the B-2s unloaded, boom, 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 we said, let's go back to Russia. They don't have these over there. But then there's another mission I do remember, 21st of April, 1945. I didn't know it at the time, but that was my last mission. the war had gone on for another year. This old boy was going home. And I told Captain, I think today's my last one. He said, just a minute, Sergeant. And he looked it up and he said, yeah, you're done. I said, thank you, sir. If you'll meet me at the NCO Club tonight, I'll buy you the biggest beer in all of Great Britain. And it turned out, though, it was the last mission my group ever flew. And on April 25th, 1945, the 8th Air Force flew its last mission of the war. And came home on the Queen Mary. 20-some thousand troops on that thing. We got into New York. We pulled into the dock. There are 2 Navy destroyers there. I said, this darn boat we're on is longer than both of them. It was. And this colonel is a fighter pilot. The man came over and said, now, when we get into New York, do not allow these men up in the rigging of this boat. He said, all right. When we got in there and they pulled us up next to the wall, they were hanging by their toenails from all the rigging. He said, oh, to hell with it. He turned around and walked away. And do you know one of the greatest things I had when we got back on the dock was a quart of ice cold sweet milk. They told us in England, don't drink it. They don't know what pasteurization is, and you don't know what you're going to get. But that was one, I drank the whole quart. I don't drink. I mean, you know, don't drink anymore, don't drink any less, but I'll tell you this story, then I'll get out of here. After every mission, the medical corps made you sign for a shot of scotch. And then Thanksgiving, November, they had the 100th mission celebration, and Thanksgiving at the same time. So you get 2 shots for every name you sign. Well, there's always somebody that doesn't do that. And after we got through, there were 6 of us flew over to the mess hall. We didn't use an airplane. Do you realize we'd been up since 3 o'clock that morning? It's now 6:30 at night on an empty stomach, and you get 2 shots of scotch. Good man, that's 100 octane. I wouldn't do it for $1 million again, unless they force me. It's just like I tell people, and they say, thank you for your service. I said, folks, don't you know that we got a letter from Uncle Sam that said, greetings, you have been selected? But I got in so late, I almost didn't get to take part in that war. I went in, reported for duty, basic training, January 1st, 1944, Camp Shelby, Mississippi. When we touched down on the runway at Lebanon, England, January 1, 1945, my tailgun and I had just completed our first year in the military and our 16th mission. I spent 6 months in the 8th Air Force. I like 2 months being in 2 years and got out on points because most of my time was overseas. But this I'll end with because I told you what a team effort it was. On January 1, 1945, most groups were recalled. Ours was not. They told us later, you were left in the air for one reason, fighter bait, to bring the fighters up. And apparently it worked because the only thing I had against the ball turrets, you can't see anything that's taking place directly above you. And I could hear the engineer and the waist gunner and the tail gunner calling out these dog fights. And I see this ME-109 coming right on at the tail at 6 o'clock. I swung my turret around, I can't get my guns up high enough to even shoot at him. And my tail gunner is back there describing this approach. Now maybe you younger people may not remember Bill Stern, but he was a great sports announcer in the 40s, 30s. And I said, damn it, Bill Stern, I don't need a blow-for-blow subscription. I can see him, shut up and shoot. But what I couldn't see, and the reason Jimmy didn't shoot, is because just about this time, I'm counting the rivets in the wing of this German fighter. He can't miss us if he tries. And all of a sudden that wing went down and he went straight down, and I, what the? 4 beautiful P-51s right behind him. And you know, for 30 seconds I felt sorry for that German pilot. Or would you like to have 4 51s chewing up your tail section? I'll tell you what, those guys in the P-51s, now, when they came along, they came with a fighter that had the range to go with us. And anytime I could look up and see those guys crisscrossing back and forth, I never worried about the German fighters. They're not stupid. They didn't really want to tangle with little 51s. And they had, one time, we got to repay the favor. This rocking his wings, and he came in, he's right under my turret. And I don't have any idea what his problem was. It wasn't mechanical. I guess he was out of ammunition. He stayed right under that ball turret that I was sitting in till we got to the channel, and he gives me a salute and dropped it. Can you imagine trying to fly as slow as a B-17 in a fighter? He's hanging on this prop trying to go as slow as we were. I love that B-17. It was a great airplane. You could shoot it all to pieces. It'd still keep going. But boy, was it slow. You see a German town, you look down 30 minutes, it's still there. We didn't know about the jet stream in those days. You know, you go in 4 hours, take you 5.5, 6 to come out. But when we turned and started back into that jet stream, we're doing 150 indicated. It's 100-mile-an-hour wind. We've got a ground speed of 50 miles an hour. But I'll tell you what, she was a tough old gal, and she brought us home every time.
Thank you, Henry. As much as we'd all like to, have equal microphone time with all of these gentlemen, we would be here till probably 12 or 1 o'clock, and some of us have a bedtime. I know I certainly do. I don't know about these guys. They're really troopers for being here for so long, and I do have a couple of slides that I want to wrap up with. And these guys have been talking about this already, so this will give you a little bit of a visual cue about it. Just a couple of slides on the opposition. The Messerschmitt Bf-109, inline engine, sleek, pretty well armed, and pretty well armored. The Focke-Wulf 190, radial engine, quick, nimble, and again, well armed. A pretty agile plane and a good interceptor. Had Germany developed this airplane like they should have, probably if you were a military strategist, they literally could have destroyed the 8th Air Force before World War II ended, because this was a game changer. Twin engine jet with 20mm cannon could shred a heavy bomber. The only problem was for the Germans that Hitler was such a lunatic that he did not want this developed as an interceptor or a fighter. And they didn't. That plus the fact that the bombing campaign did a lot of damage to German aircraft factories kept the Me-262 from flying in great numbers. But when they were up, they were horrific to fight against. They created tremendous damage. If they had been able to manufacture a couple hundred or 500 or 1,000 of those things, definitely a game changer. Now, as Henry mentioned, it was American manufacturing technique and construction methods that saved an awful lot of lives. This is a well-known photograph of a B-17 that was struck in midair by a German fighter and nearly ripped the entire empennage off, the whole tail section. And that plane made it all the way back to England with that much damage. Here's one, a B-17 with the entire nose gone. I'm sure the Bombardier and Navigator didn't come out of that unscathed, but the rest of the crew got back. That one again came back with the entire nose gone. For HAP, there you go. There's a B-24, no nose. The entire nose has been blown off, but it's still in the air and it got home. For Punchy and his heavy P-47, the Jug, they could take enormous damage. This was flak damage that tore up came out of the Army in 1953, and this was for the European theater where 23,000 plus KIA, actually in flight on a mission. Wounded in action, almost 10,000, and 500 of those actually died of wounds within a relatively short time. Missing in action, this is an interesting one, 2,800 plus, but 2,300 of them actually returned to duty. So, a lot of guys that were missing in action, behind enemy lines and stuff were actually able to get back to their units. And then POWs, actually more POWs than there were killed in action, over 26,000. And 148 died in captivity. Now, we're just talking about the European theater. This does not include the Pacific theater at all. The numbers there, especially for the POWs, were a lot more grim. And before we end this, I think it's really appropriate because they've mentioned the men that didn't come back and the men that were lost. There are two little mini factoids that you might find interesting, and both of them have to do with the Black Sheep Squadron that I've been really familiar with for 20 years. And one of them is that when the B-17 was being developed, it was first the XB-15. And one of the people who worked at Boeing Aircraft Factory as a draftsman was Gregory Hallenbeck, who is a recent graduate of the University of Washington. He later found out through some family paperwork that he was married, had kids, and had this job as a draftsman. He later found out that he was Gregory Boyington and joined the Marine Corps in the 1930s as an unmarried man, even though he had a wife and a couple of kids that he kept in secret on the side. It's a little bit of a long story, but interesting that one of the draftsmen who worked on the XB-15 was later the leader of the Black Sheep Squadron. The other little factoid is that the most famous and meaningful poem ever written about flying was written by John Gillespie McGee Jr., an American fighter pilot who flew with the RAF and was actually killed in a mid-air collision in England just a couple of months after writing this famous poem, which I'm going to recite for you. His cousin was Christopher McGee, who became a fighter pilot and ace with the Black Sheep Squadron. So just kind of a little interesting twist on the Marines and their fighter pilots and the B-17 and this famous poem, that there's a relationship that hardly anybody knows about. It's just kind of one of those things that you can dig up in the archives. Anyway, to honor those who didn't come home, and I'm hoping I can keep it together to read this because it's not easy to read through without getting choked up. It's called High Flight. And I'm sorry I don't have my Garrison Keillor baritone voice to really do an appropriate job of this, but it goes like this. Oh, I have slipped the surly bonds of earth and danced the skies on laughter-silvered wings. Sunward I've climbed and joined the tumbling mirth of sun-split clouds and done 100 things you have not dreamed of, wheeled and soared and swung high in the sunlit silence. Hovering there, I've chased the shouting wind along and flung my eager craft through footless halls of air. Up the long, delirious, burning blue, I've topped the windswept heights with easy grace, where never lark or even eagle flew. And, while with silent, lifting mind I've trod the high, untrespassed sanctity of space, put out my hand and touched the face of God. And with that, let's have a huge round for these 5 wonderful members of the Mighty Eight.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Where did you get your number? It's too low. Well, I'll tell you about that. I'll tell you about that.